And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Joshua Scott, who is a seasoned CISO and an expert in the cybersecurity space. Thanks very much, Josh, for joining the show. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Uh, I mentioned in a few minutes before this conversation, like how I love your background. So I don't want to steal thunder. Maybe you can just give us a quick review of how you got to senior management in this space.
Okay. I mean, I've been in the tech space and security space for quite a while. So I think I got started in tech in the mid '90s. I started actually tinkering around with security probably like the late '90s, and I spent probably like the first almost half of my career, maybe two-thirds of my career, kind of on the engineering side. So really deep diving into technology and really understanding, pretty much everything related to kind of security tech and security processes. And then, around the 2011, 2012 timeframe, I decided to, start moving into leadership. And, you know, over the, fast forward 9 years now, I've been doing it for 9 years and really enjoying it, really loving kind of, I still look at it from an engineering architecture landscape and, lens is how do I put, the right pieces in place? How do I experiment and try to find out, what's the best, you know, design to actually make this team kind of high performing. And it's been a great journey so far.
So it's so interesting. So you have a technical background as well as you've done. You went ahead and done some of the security certifications and so on, and then the other day I noticed a CISO saying that, oh, don't ask for CISSP certifications
Yeah.
because, and you probably know who I'm talking about, and because our job has nothing to do with with specifically the nuts and bolts of cybersecurity. What's your take on this one?
I mean, I think, certifications, so the way I've always looked at certifications is they're more something, it's a personal accomplishment. I don't think they should be a requirement for, getting a position because they're not really a strong indicator of, the particular knowledge in that area. I think they help and using it as an experience to actually learn some of those areas is useful. And then again, achieving the certification, that it's a personal accomplishment that you can feel proud of. And it gives you the confidence to say that I understand this particular area, or at least, you think you understand it. But from a CISO standpoint or a security leadership standpoint, even from a senior engineer standpoint, I really don't think it's necessary. I think it's more about experience and, the knowledge you have, and you don't need a certification to prove that.
I agree, and it also shows commitment, just personal commitment. I think
Yeah,
because it
yeah.
takes the time and effort, shows that you're committed, to the profession and went ahead and did some of these. Um, so, what's interesting about your background as well is that you are, as you mentioned, you're a tinkerer, you're a builder, and you were on kind of the vendor side of the house for a while. So you were working with customers, kind of pitching, quote unquote, on the technical side solutions and so on. Um, you know, I think that there is a bit of a, and this is again something I've seen recently from posts from people. It seems to be a bit of a contentious relationship between the kind of the vendor and the enterprise. Um, I've seen some posts saying, "Oh, it's snake oil," and uh, you know. They like over promise and under deliver and so on, and granted, everybody's trying to make a living. There's 3,000 vendors plus, even more. I don't know what the numbers are right now. What's your take on it? How can we, kind of heal that kind of relationship between the enterprise, especially now, asking that question from you because you're seeing these vendors are probably pitching to you today. So,
Right,
and you
right.
were back then. So, any take on that?
I mean, I'd say the biggest thing from a vendor standpoint is transparency and honesty. That's what I want to see. Nobody's perfect. Everybody's going to have, flaws in their program, flaws in their product, but just be upfront about it. Don't try to make grandiose claims that you've got a world class security program when you've got one person running within your running that program. Right? I think it's just vendors need to be more transparent, and I think if they did that, the relationships would be a little bit better.
Now, is transparency going to hinder getting new clients? Because I think for transparency to really work, um, everyone has to be transparent. it's almost like you have to kind of bring the line to the same uniformal front. If you are transparent and honest, but then your competitor, quote unquote, like promises a couple other enhancement or features you may not have, so do you see the problem? Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I think the reputation definitely matters. You see certain companies that have made grandiose claims, their product doesn't actually live up to expectations, and yet they've been claiming that it does. And then the security community, it's not a huge community, and we do talk a lot, and we share these types of vendors. And there's certain vendors that we generally stay away from, just because of those types of issues, right? So I have no problem giving a vendor that doesn't have, everything, or they're trying to release new features, but they're not there yet. They're being transparent and open about it. I have no problem, trying those out and actually growing with that vendor. I like that type of relationship, because then I can actually help, mold the product to what we need as well.
And how do you make sure that the vendor actually delivers the kind of the business drivers? I mean, you as CISO and an executive, you are always aligned with the business, right? And I find sometimes vendors come in and they pitch you, and it's all about the technology, the underlying nuts and bolts, and then yet you're an executive is really looking to solve problems, really. So what do you recommend for vendors that comes over and say, hey, go ahead and buy this? You know, what kind of point should they use to kind of trying to convince you that they're the right solution for you?
I think one of the ways, something that I even do within my teams, is really, what is the outcome we're looking for, right? It's not just about the technology, but it's about what value is it going to provide? How is it going to make my life easier as a CISO, or as a security leader? How is it going to make my team function better, right? What kind of efficiency gains, or what kind of reporting gains, what kind of process gains do we get from it? Showing it in that light versus just saying, we've got the latest and greatest technology and we do these, amazing things. It's like, all right, now, put it in a different lens, show it from a different aspect.
Can you do you use any matrix when you're looking at technologies and on top of that, assuming that you have a limited budget, obviously, how do you then decide, okay, I'm going to prioritize these solutions over others in terms of risk mitigation? What's that process look like for you?
From a requirement sample, we'll define kind of, what are the nice to have, what are the must-haves, the things we're trying to accomplish, what are the different, feature components that we need to solve that. And then we'll, a solution, how much things need to features. I think we're always taking with any vendor you purchase, because I've been around for 20 plus years. Right. I've run into too many vendors. When I was at Realtor, one of the things we did was we started ripping out a lot of the vendors we had and just merging, services or Microsoft, those type of solutions instead of a solution. They don't solve the problems.
Joshua, this is what happens in a live session. I'm losing a little bit. I think that the I don't know if you have like any applications that are eating bandwidth in the background. In the meantime, while you do this and we multitask, I'll ask you the next kind of question. So you mentioned rip and replace. Isn't it like a major hurdle for a lot of vendors out there? Because when they come in, you most likely have a solution in place, and you made the investment both from a setup perspective, training, you have it like budgeted and so on. So how do you convince from your perspective to do a kind of a forklift, or maybe not a forklift, maybe you just have to play well with others? What's the kind of the process like?
It depends on the solution, but ripping it out, for me, I always look at it from a value standpoint. Do I have to hire more people just to maintain the solution that still doesn't do everything that I need, or can I just build it myself, or can I have a team that builds it for me? So there's a lot of different factors that come into play, but we did something similar at Realtor. We looked at various solutions and we'd say, all right, what, do we really want to go with like a cloud security posture management solution? And then we ultimately came to the decision based on our scale and based on our needs, we were just going to, kind of create our own at the time. This is probably like 2017 timeframe. And we found that to be kind of, the better path forward. So really, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish and, kind of the criticality of certain kind of priorities.
Build versus buy has always been an issue. But I think for realtors specifically, you guys had the since you're kind of an IT based company, right? You had the expertise around it, and you could go ahead. But there are a lot of companies that don't have that kind of privilege, and you're
Yeah.
smiling.
We didn't really have it, so we
Yeah,
had to build it. I mean, we figured it out along the way, and you take small bets, right? We started very small, and we said, all right, let's replace this one little thing, this one little widget, and we're gonna figure out how to automate that, or we're gonna figure out how to replace this one tool, and then over time, it just kept on growing, and we ended up with essentially our own platform for doing certain types of security related items, security event management, and those kind of things. But you start small. I was assigning these types of tasks to one of my senior engineers who didn't really have a background in creating tool sets, but he grew with it. He learned a ton, and he's actually extremely good at it now.
Do you think that you having that background of being individual contributors actually had have a hands-on experience with some of these tools, as well as once you have a hands-on experience, you also have a hands-on in frustration, right?
Yeah,
Because you know what it means to how
yeah.
difficult it is to customize a firewall and makes a change. Yeah, yeah. So do you think that really helped you?
It definitely helps me. I mean, I definitely have biases when it comes to vendors, just based on my experiences, and my teams have known that too. And I'm very upfront with them, saying, "Look, this is my experience with it. Yours may differ, but I'm okay with them having different opinions on it. But I am opinionated when it comes to vendors and with the solutions and build versus buy. Right? I have a tendency now. I used to like to buy things. Now I actually like to have the teams build things because I think you get more value. At the end of the day, although it is it really depends on what you're trying to solve. But building means you can actually build it to what your organization needs, and you get to build in your business context and the way that you actually report, because every business is somewhat unique.
What about providing you a tool that it has like the building blocks and allows you to have the customization? Because I find most of the tools these days are like almost like a black box. It's almost like a the Apple
Yep.
style, where like you don't have access to
This
anything.
is
It's like
it. Yep.
Windows, where they hide everything from you.
Yep.
Do you prefer the other approach where you can get like down into command line and start like taking all that stuff and making like the product, massage the product the way you want it to be?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that over the years we started looking at more was solutions that actually could provide basically the building blocks, or the reusable components that we could actually leverage. It's common tools. I mean, we leverage things like Jira, and we'd leverage the API connectivity with there, and use it as a platform for not just ticketing and tracking, but kind of some workflow items, and we would kind of provide some glue around it. So as long as they had an API, they had kind of connectivity, we would leverage some of the building blocks in the other tools. We did the same thing with Splunk, and even AWS. We did a lot of that there. So I don't want to build everything. There's certain things that doesn't make sense to build out that kind of stuff, right? But I like to build out the glue and the integration layers.
So talking about integration, right? So, there's almost no standalone products anymore. They have to integrate back into an existing technology you already have, and it allows for leveraging that technology investment you already made. How do you test that, and how do you, again, you're a CISO for API company, so you probably have in-depth knowledge, because that's where things are going right now. Everything is API driven. How do you test new technologies that you are considering bringing into your organization for that connectivity? Because most of the time, it's so hard to actually test it out, during a pilot phase, because you don't want to connect it to existing technologies until you actually, ready to go. So, what's the process look like to you?
I mean, first thing is defining, let's put together kind of a use case, a sample case that we can actually, trial or, pilot, and then see how that technology will actually apply to that, right? How can we actually, solve that one little small problem? We'll take a very, very small problem and figure out how to solve it with the platform, and see if we can actually figure it out in a 30-day period, right? If we can't figure it out, in that time period, then maybe it's too complex, or maybe we really got to take a step back and figure out if we're solving it correctly. So there's, it really depends on, how you're solving it. I mean, we think every vendor we look at to a certain extent is, we look at it somewhat uniquely, and, right or wrong, that's just kind of the way it's always kind of worked out is, every problem is somewhat unique. So we're trying to, we look at each vendor uniquely.
What's interesting about pilots and how POC, proof of concept process, is that you have a limited, resources in that regard. So even to pick and choose, because most vendors say, hey, why don't you just try it for 30 days, but you don't have the capacity to try all the vendors. So how do you
Mhm.
shortlist and say, okay, I have this particular use case I'm looking for, it is like 20 vendors, I'll probably look at these two. What's the process look like for you?
I mean, I leverage networks and peer research and other CISOs and all that. I leverage that extensively. I think that's to me. I want to hear others who have gone through similar challenges. I mean, we're all trying to do similar things. So I'll pull. I'll post something in one of the Slack channels I'm a part of, and see what other CISOs are using it and what they think. That's kind of how I come up with a short list. And once we come up with those 2 to 3 vendors, then we'll list out our specific requirements and then how well it works within our environment, because that's when it gets specific to kind of our use case in our environment.
So it's so interesting because now you also are part of the Silicon Valley CISO investment group, right? And you deal a lot with early stage startups as part of Seed. So, but now you have what you just mentioned is a bit of a hurdle for these companies to get new customers, because again, you like to see somebody else who use the technology, but then most of the new technologies don't have that kind of referenceable list of customers. So it's the chicken and the egg. They don't have it because they're new, and then it's hard to get in and actually get these. So since you now have that kind of insider view for some of these startups, I'm assuming you go through the process of vetting them. What do you recommend for an early stage startup that is looking to acquire the first couple of customers and getting over the hump of like, okay, who else is using it?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd say have that good solid business case about what it's actually solving for the for the CISOs or for the security leaders. Get those design partners that you can actually prove your concept to with. Right, I think that's kind of an important thing. I am somewhat new to kind of the SVCI org and that side of it, so just starting to get ramped up and getting involved. But I've been in like I said, the security industry for a long time, so I definitely enjoy seeing these early stage companies and seeing how they're trying to solve some of the problems that we've had. I mean, we've got a number of problems in the security space, and it's great to see kind of new and novel ways of solving kind of the challenges we've had for the past 20 years. I think that's the exciting part about the investment side of it,
Mhm.
is just there are a lot of really good ideas out there, and it's is it going to be a viable idea? And that's what we're evaluating.
Well, is it a platform or a feature? I mean, that's
Yeah,
like always the question, right?
yep. Yeah. I mean, that's part of, what we look at as well, right? Is this something that is going to be, just a single feature, and what can it grow to? Or is it something that, is going to be more of a, a long, a platform that can scale and add additional kind of, ancillary or adjacent features?
That stuff is so cool. I really enjoy working with startups. I think that they are the kind of the forefront of where innovation. Basically, we need
Mhm.
that to in order for them
Definitely.
to grow. And then that's how a lot of mature businesses grow, right? A lot of the mature vendors, the way they improve and get better is that they acquire new technologies out there because they don't have the capacity to innovate on a regular basis. And I'm assuming that have you thought about maybe like I don't know if you're building products right now. Have you thought about like taking things that you've built, maybe a realtor or postman and so on, and productize them and becoming a vendor yourself for some areas?
I'm I've thought about it at times. I really do like leading programs and leading people, and kind of kind of the role that I have now. I could see it being. I don't know. I don't know that I'd actually end up in the product space as a vendor, but who knows? You never know what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, you never know. Listen, you've come a long way. I'm not surprised if if one day I'll see you leading your own company in some capacity. So let's talk a bit about you mentioned you kind of, we got a little bit of a glimpse to how you run your teams. Um, so there's something I'd like to dive into a little bit more. So, you have experience building security teams, right?
Mhm.
So how do you select these team members? How do you develop that kind of culture? As you mentioned that you tell people, you're very upfront with people over certain topics and so on. How do you build that culture that you want to have in the organization? Because it's so important. I think there's something we don't talk to. We talk about the hard skills, but not so much as soft skills, and then the
Right.
leadership skills. So how did you manage to acquire leadership skills, from individual contributor to managing people? What's that process look like, and how do you determine what's important for you from a leadership standpoint?
It's funny. So when I first got into leadership, one of the things I tried to do the most was kind of model my behavior off of some of the best leaders that I had throughout my career.
Hmm.
One of my first bosses that I had when I first got into tech in like the mid '90s, I really enjoyed tech and I was really good at it. And he's like, all right, you know what? We're going to focus on your strengths. I don't want you to worry about the things that you're not good at with like time management and project management and all that kind of stuff. I want you to focus on just what you're good at. And it really kind of stuck with me. I'm like, all right, focus on your strengths, right? And I've done the Clifton Strengths Finders and kind of read the book Know Your Strengths, and kind of really done a lot of work and kind of understanding strengths and how they apply. So I apply that same type of thing to my team, right? I look for people that that have strengths. I want to find out folks that are find folks that are passionate with what they do, and then really do everything I can to enable them to to follow that passion, to really focus on it. Take away as many roadblocks as I can. So if they're not good at managing their time and projects, then you know what, I'm going to pair them up with somebody that does project management and can help with that. Right. That way, each person can really focus on what they're good at, because you're never going to really get that great at something that you're weak at. Right. You can learn, you can continue doing it, but if it's not a passion and something that drives you, you're not going to put in the necessary time. Like most people, like speaking for myself, I didn't put in enough time into those areas because it wasn't a passion. My strengths are, I'm an idea guy, I'm a future guy, I'm good at strategy, but I'm not good at execution. Right? I'm upfront with my team about that. And I think, that's another big thing too, being upfront with the team, transparency. So I'm very clear on, hey, this is what, my role is. This is what your role is. I always make it clear to them too, that this is our team, not my team. So I want them to, all have basically a say into how we do things. It's not necessarily managed by consensus, because you never get too far if you're always doing that. So I still am the person that will ultimately veto or approve certain items, but I want everybody to actually contribute to it. And I even do that in meetings. So even when we used to actually meet in person, I would call on anybody throughout the meeting just to say, hey, okay, what do you think about this particular topic? And I found that the more you involve them, the more you actually make sure that their voice is heard. The more you respect their voice and make sure that they can kind of have some flexibility to learn new things. That goes a long way. And then giving people opportunity, more opportunity, right? Training, flexibility, career advancement. Those types of things are important. Early on in my career, I wanted to get trained, right? That was an important thing, because I knew what it would pay, what the dividends were at the end. So I would stay with the company longer because they had a good training program. So that's something else that I've done, both at Realtor and now at Postman, is really focusing on, giving them the tools and the basically, giving them the tools to do their job well.
It's fantastic insight to your world and how you manage these teams. And I think asking them questions while, what do they think about it during meetings, also make sure that they're on top of it, so
Yeah, yeah.
they don't doze off because you catch them by surprise. So what's the process like for you to juggle between, kind of catching up with the team members and their projects and the various tasks you have, and then because you have a roadmap of what you have to accomplish in the next 6 to 12 months and so on, and then taking that and then managing up, because you're also reporting, I'm assuming, to the CEO or the CIO, and then you have that kind of going on. How do you it's there's a lot of moving parts, so what that looks like for you, and again, this is something you had to learn, right? Because it's not,
Mhm.
so you, aside from the the technical skills, this is something you had to learn gradually. So how was that process as well for you?
So I learned quickly at Realtor, when I got overwhelmed with just the amount of things happening, that I couldn't do a lot of that kind of strategy leadership type stuff on my own, right? So I had somebody in my governance team that I basically appointed as my program manager, and he helped me along with kind of getting things organized and putting structures in place and helping kind of manage our projects. So that's something I've done here as well. Is we brought on he was at Realtor, he was split between kind of governance work and program management. Here, I brought on a dedicated program manager, and it's huge, because you need that help getting things organized, and they're well versed in that kind of stuff. He's a program and a program and project manager, and is well versed in that kind of stuff, and has been doing it for many years. Understands the space well. Is such a huge help. I wouldn't be able to do the job without him, and I think that's a vital role.
And then the management of expectations from the executive and the board and so on. I'm assuming that you have to report. You're part of the kind of the management meetings and so on. Do you face questions that are different now than they were like 12 months ago, or you know uh, the executives are more aware of what's happening? Have you seen any changes there?
So I was very lucky joining Postman in that the entire executive team here is very aware of security and very supportive of it. That's one of the things that really kind of that I loved when I interviewed here, is just how serious they take it, and how I spent a lot of time at Realtor, basically trying to justify my existence. It was always, this is why you need security. This is why I'm here. This is why my team's here. This is why I need more funding. And then I come here and I don't, none of that, it's already been justified. It's not a matter of, having to say, this is why we need X, Y, and Z. It's like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to make progress. And, let's report on kind of just the progress we're making, but we don't have any support issues. Because the founders understand, and everyone understands that security is extremely important, and we don't want anything to happen to our product. And as we continue to grow, it's vital to actually definitely cripple us or slow us down. So that's not something we want.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was about to ask you, and you beat me to it. That you raised a topic. So you're a startup company, right? You're in growth stage.
Mhm.
And that by itself lends itself to some security challenges. Specifically, um, can you touch upon that a little bit about like maybe the product development life cycle, how you inject security into that? What type of security control specifically, because you have a lot of the requirements associated with security, but then you don't have necessarily the resources like like a larger enterprise or bank and so on.
Yeah, it's interesting coming to, so Realtor was 25 years old or something like that. So, very established, a lot of, existing processes. And then I come somewhere where, it's about 5 years old, right? So you kind of, you take it for granted on kind of the processes that exist within, a more established company. So it's definitely, there's a maturity cycle. And, here, there's a lot of things that we didn't have in place because, we grew so rapidly, and, we've been doing so well, but, perhaps the architectures weren't looked at enough, at the beginning, or the architecture was fine for, our initial growth phase. But now that we've gotten actually much bigger, now we got to, take a step back and look at it again. So it's been interesting, seeing that. There's a lot of different areas that, we have to kind of unwind and say, all right, you know what, maybe the decision we made, 2 years ago was fine then, but now doesn't apply here. So we're really looking at, how do we scale? From like an application security standpoint, we have a very kind of high touch point operation where I've got AppSec engineers doing a lot of kind of some of the creating the test cases and doing some of the the kind of the part of the release cycle. But that's not going to scale as we continue to add engineering teams, and I can't maintain a 1-to-1 ratio AppSec engineer to squad, because I think we're already at like 20 plus squads. So as we continue to grow, that number will continue to grow, and it just doesn't make sense to continue to have a very high, human touch point process. So we're looking at things like automation. How do we actually inject more into kind of the the build cycle? How do we do secure defaults, so as something is deployed, it's already secure from the start, and then they have to make changes to actually remove security with certain authority. So that's kind of what we're looking at, and we really got to start thinking about it from a scale standpoint, from a future standpoint, and that's something that we had a lot of things in place at Realtor, whereas here certain things weren't in place yet.
So I'm going to ask you a question about automation, but before we jump into that, I want to kind of touch a bit about the fact that you didn't have a lot coming in. So I guess it's a double-edged sword, right? You don't have some of the legacy system you have to worry about, like no COBOL servers or
Yeah.
whatever. But then you also like are less mature from a security standpoint. Do you find it's better to come in to a carte blanche, or is it better to come into a more mature business and trying to change?
I personally love this environment that I'm in now.
Mhm.
For me, it's we can actually mold the processes to what makes sense for us. right? Instead of having kind of, it's really hard to unwind a process that's been there for many, many years. But when it hasn't existed and all of a sudden you got to establish it new, it's a lot easier to actually put it in place and do it the way that you want. So that's one of the things I really enjoy about being in a company at this level of maturity and this stage, is that you can have an impact really quickly, and you can define the process the way you think is going to be best for your program.
And I love the fact that you have a lot of the kind of security posture on your website for everyone to see. And I mentioned to you that I think that should be done more. So obviously, not everyone is going to go on there and is going to even understand half the stuff that's on there,
Right. Right.
unless you have the background. But the fact that you have it on there shows, first of all, commitment, transparency. Come back to transparency, from the vendor, but you have transparency on your end as well. Why? And I'm assuming you had something to do with it. Um, why did you decide to have that kind of publicly available? And what was the feedback of you kind of revealing, open up some of the kimono in terms of like what are you doing?
Now, I'll full disclosure, I actually would love to take credit for that, but actually the team that existed before me actually did that. And I was super pleased to see that. So we are actually doing a revamp on that to make it even more
I see that,
transparent and
Josh,
provide more
you're
information.
transparent yourself.
Yeah, yeah. It's important, right? I'd rather, but they did a fantastic. Like, again, one of the things that I really liked about joining Postman was,
Mhm.
certain things in place that I would do anyways, right? So they already had that kind of external presence, and I really saw an opportunity to kind of take it to the next level. How do we actually take that, the slash security page, and make it even, more transparent and provide even more information? So we're looking at ways to, we want to include more information about, privacy in there, more stuff about what we're doing from a compliance standpoint, provide some information on our philosophy and how we actually approach security, maybe cover some stuff about our team. So we're actually at the moment right now currently working on kind of a revamped version of that will launch pretty soon.
And it shows commitment.
Yeah.
It does show commitment from the entire organization. As you mentioned, the DNA is
Yeah.
to be secure. So coming back to automation very quickly, you know, orchestration and automation, it was supposed to be the be all and end all of security, and for a long time, those two were flaunted by a lot of security vendors. But yet, we still need security professionals. There's still a lot of hands-on manual process. Why is that? Security shouldn't be that tough. We should be able to automate most of this stuff. No.
I mean, their security is huge, and with the amount of change that we have from a tech standpoint, there is so much to consider, and that's just when you're looking at it from a tech standpoint. There's a lot of human elements and human processes and awareness and those types of things that also factor in. So yeah, you can automate certain portions of it and make it simpler, but in a lot of cases, you can't automate the entire life cycle from start to finish. In most cases, right, you still have human interactions, human touch points to actually review and validate and make sure that the data works properly. Systems fail as well, right? Things change, new technologies brought in. There's so many different factors that weigh into it. The threat landscape changes as well, right? So we're the only constant we haven't changed, which I tell my teams that all the time. We have to be able to account for change. So from an automation standpoint, we want to automate the things that are taking up our time, that are kind of costly from a process standpoint. So what's the biggest value that we can actually do from an automation standpoint to remove some of the mundane work or the things that we often forget about. Like, all right, let's automate those that don't require a whole lot of thought, and then let's focus and let's put our attention to the things where our thought process, or basically our minds, our background and our experience is more valuable. And that's kind of how I've been focusing on automation, is let's remove the low hanging fruit.
Yeah, and and I don't know if you agree with me, but I think the rate of change is increasing, right?
Oh
Or
yeah, oh yeah.
so things are moving quicker than they used to be. Are there any particular technologies that excite you, that you feel that are going to be a great contributors to how things are going to be done, in the future years to come?
I mean, I think I'm excited by most technology. So, ever since kind of, the cloud and how, cloud was such a disruptor, I think it's the fact that we now have access to, unlimited resources and services that we didn't have before. I thought that was, it's one of the things I talked about with my previous team, is that, now we can do things that before we had to work with, our operations team to stand up a server, or we had to work with somebody to purchase some other software. Now we can just spin up these services, create our own, Lambda to do something, and actually, do some portion of security, response, or automate some portion of it without needing anybody else. Right. So the access to resources that we have now is amazing. So I think seeing more around those types of things, and there's some interesting vendors that are doing more kind of threat detection and identifying kind of risks within an environment, or potential risky areas. I think we'll see more of those because things keep on changing, but it's just hard to keep up with. And, when you talk about like cloud posture, that space keeps on evolving and changing, and CASB, and it just everything keeps on changing so much that I think from a security standpoint, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, that, and I believe also compliance is becoming more of a burden, and it seems like it's getting, compliance in different areas are becoming, more of a, cardinal area of the business as well. So, Josh, it's been a real pleasure. Like I said, I love your background. It's really tremendous. I'm personally excited to follow you to see what you're going to be doing in the next couple of years. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they need some advice, or, just get in touch? What's the easiest way?
LinkedIn is the best place. I actually check LinkedIn fairly frequently. So, hit me up on LinkedIn if you have any questions, or interested in any of the jobs we have. We are hiring across the board. So definitely, hit me up.
Fantastic. Josh, it's been a real pleasure to having you today, and I'm looking forward to potentially hosting you in some of the in-person events in New York City when, if the time and schedule permits, and we are all well and safe in the next several months. Thank you very much for joining
Awesome.
us.
Yeah.
Thanks all
Thanks
for
so much.
joining.
Yep. Look forward to catching up at some point soon.
Take care all.
All right.
See you soon.